Returning to our Pleiadean home, Part 1. Question. Many IFR songs, as well as multiple answers provided by Oris, indicate the process of us returning to our native Pleiadean home, located on Pleiades within the stellar system of Sirius A or elsewhere. In this regard, I have a question. Assuming that I, as the Pleiadian self-consciousness Ulark, which resembles my sound space code, took part, along with many other civilizations, in the genetic experiment on Earth and have utilized my DNA to facilitate forming of a new kind of intelligent beings, the present human society today. It is obvious that as a result of this experiment, a new collective consciousness of humanity will form, which will constitute a new branch of the development of the collective cosmic intelligence of the human type, no longer resembling any of the civilizations that participated in the experiment. Yes, the Earthlings somehow will be similar to the Pleiadians or Siriusians, who contributed some parts of their DNA code, and so on. However, the new human civilization can never become one of the civilizations that conceived it, gave birth to it. As far as I understand, the essence of the genetic experiment is the acquisition of a new experience through the creation of new life forms. The new forms of life are psychoenergetically linked to their parents, continuously broadcasting their evolutionary experience, through which parents also evolve. The way I see it, parents and children cannot exist in the same house because they represent different civilizations. Thus, I have difficulty understanding how exactly can we return back to our stellar home. Space-time paradoxes. Fortunately, in reality, the entire multiverse is arranged and functions in the much more advanced fashion, not so primitively, but rather much more universally and paradoxically than you can imagine. The entire issue of a profound understanding regarding the multiverse's various principles of interpenetrability and its holographic nature lies in the absence in our current perception systems of certain mechanisms that allow all of us in our bioplasma future to avoid such an intricate dependence on a very powerful manifested factor that we currently interpret as space-time. Perceived as a paradox, the plasticity of all space-time continuums lies in the fact that everything has manifested simultaneously instantaneously. In relation to our present, coarse, inertial existence, I can assert that neither us in the future nor us in the past or present actually exist. There are only different perception system possibilities related to decoding the information expressed through the corresponding forms of self-consciousness, which is manifestation form plus multidimensional self-consciousness. Depending on these possibilities, each form of self-consciousness acquires the ability to manipulate certain time flows, thus initiating the activity of various unpredictable spatial multiverse tunnels, so-called Zboalk's entities throughout space-time, which provide the scenario composition of the collective consciousness of all corresponding types. For example, human continuums, cat continuums, bird continuums, mineral continuums, and so on. Now, let me highlight a common misconception regarding your ideas related to the moment of your conception and birth. From the more advanced standpoint, outside the subjective binding to a single historical fact or the period, no such moment actually exists. That is, because it's in fact smeared throughout the countless, multitudinous scenarios of your individual interpretations, simultaneously manifested in an infinite variety of various spatio-temporal conditions. And if you take into account the difference in parameters of the time entities of the multiverse engaged in the process of your birth, simultaneously directed throughout various space-time continuums, you will find a very interesting paradox. You and all your ancestors, as well as all of your future, much more developed descendants, who have left the Earth and now exist in other conditions throughout our galaxy, all of you were born at the same time, having formed a countless amount of various human cosmic civilizations. At the same time, it's very likely that all those whom we interpret as Pleiadians are in fact ourselves, who in parallel with us present, consistently implementing their eternal existence throughout variable multiverses time entity streams, while developing in qualitatively different conditions. Moreover, we ourselves in other scenarios can be our parents, our children, grandchildren, our grandfathers or grandmothers. The illusion of our supposed division with collective consciousness of much more developed than ours human civilizations is not only pertaining to the tremendous qualitative difference in the organization of our and their brain structure, including the anatomy of the organism as a whole, but also in the incomparable difference in the properties of our and their time entities. Let me remind you that after your physical birth, the mechanism of multifactorial DNA program distribution, regardless of your actions, immediately began the process of regulating the expression of different sequences of your nuclear genome. Although, in fact, this correction began long before your conception by your parents, in the distant and ancient realities of various temporal loops, which are deviations from the optimal development vector. The process of the DNA manifestation of our biological and bioplasma interpretations has begun with the formation of the DNA structure of two constituents of our future physical analogs, which are bodies, corresponding to our objectives. These are vibrationally inferior analog of our physical body, the lutealny body, and the vibrationally higher frequency analog of the physical body is something I define as the crystalny body. At the same time, the entire vibrational network of energy information interconnections, peculiar to most diverse forms of life existing on our planet, has been initially created. It allowed in some versions of the multiverse to achieve the appearance in some forms of self-consciousness of a sustainable true human development direction trend, which is determined by the balanced and harmonious development of altruism and intellect. Yes, scientists from a number of highly developed space civilizations took part in the implementation of this last bioengineering project. There were few unsuccessful attempts. However, the nucleotide basis of the most important synthesizing sequences of our genome, in accordance with the purposes of each civilization, constitute specially selected sections of the genomes of representatives of about 10 diverse human civilizations, as well as representatives of several comparable consciousness-wise civilizations. The nucleotide sequences of our human nuclear genomes themselves were manifested in the vibrationally corresponding modes of the temporal entities as the results of a level-by-level interrelationship, synchronization between the creators of the lutealny and crystalny bodies. Time correction genes. I would like to highlight that our nuclear genome contains 5 groups of genes that ensure the interrelationship of genetic programs with creators of time entities. Moreover, 3 of the 5 groups of time correction genes, TCGs, are located in the junk part of the human DNA, also known as non-coding DNA. Creators of the first group, TCG1, which belong to the category of the synthesizing genes, ensure the correction of individual parameters of the temporary entities. These parameters are inherent in the perception systems of non-human intracellular forms of self-consciousness and are adapted by productive interaction between themselves. For example, without the activity of this TCG group, time correction genes, in the genome, intracellular forms of self-consciousness of leukotrienes and thromboxanes, fats and lipids, fatty acids and prostaglandins, as well as nucleoli and mitochondria, lysosomes and ribosomes, neurofibrils and neurofilaments, simply could not interact smoothly among themselves due to the fact that their self-consciousness is tied to different time flows of various time entities. They would not be able to perceive each other in any way. Creators of the other group, TCG2, belong to the category of regulatory genes. They correct intertemporal interactions between the cellular ensemble creators, structuring tissues of different organs and parts of our entire protein nucleic complex, physical body. Without them, the reciprocal relationships between the collective intellects of organs and glands, as well as between the creators of the white and gray matter of the brain, different areas and centers of the neo, archae, and paleocortex, between all the hormones and creators of all other systems of our body would not be possible, because most forms of self-consciousness of our cellular ensembles are formed by various cosmic civilizations structuring different time entities. Creators of the third group, TCG3, also refer to regulatory genes. They ensure the current perception by us, people, of the surrounding reality dynamics, based on the functions and relationships between the hippocampus and terminal complex creators, and other creators of the subcortex and neural creators of all parts of cerebral cortex. They neutralize the difference in the space-time parameters of each such form of self-consciousness, generalize their individually complex gravitational components, and decode them for common use. Creators of the fourth group, TCG4, are the synthesizing genes. They provide the interconnection between the information space of all body cells and their development programs, meaning that they recode the ethereal type of the semantic information into the corresponding gravitational parameters of the electromagnetic conscious fields, which are peculiar to different representatives of non-human life forms, including P-wave, morphogenetic, and other types of vibrations. Finally, the creators of the fifth group implement the functions of the regulatory genes. They are involved in the realization of the relationship between the genetic human programs and internal structures of all neurons of the brain, cortex and subcortex. Additionally, they are engaged into the maintaining of the relationship between the semantic information of the lutealny body, which is low vibration analog of the physical body, and high frequency human information of crystalline body, the highly vibrational analog of the physical body. For example, when certain high vibration zones of the cortex are initiated in our brain, the TCG5 creators reformat the time parameters of the conglomerate conscious fields of our highly vibrational interpretations, who inhabit various worlds, into more or less understandable thought-sense perceptions. With stabilization in the cerebral cortex, the generation of highly vibrational psychic creativity, and the presence of a powerful influence of the space-time factor, the creators of the TCG5 can spontaneously and instantaneously teleport our physical body to higher frequency realities. Moreover, our nuclear genome has a very diffusive, in terms of its localization, existing in both the diverse as well as the structural parts of our DNA, specific supergroup of more universal genes of temporal correction, UGTC, whose task is to initiate a strictly defined genome processes algorithm. Their presence sustains our potential to almost instantly recover in both instances within the same space-time continuum group, and following the act of teleportation from one time flow to another. Although this potential is blocked in the current continuum groups, but can be active in others. Provided for this very phenomenon, it is possible to ensure our physical recreation after the act of an inverse ray refocusing, which is the global shift of scenario as a result of a powerful solar protuberance flash, or after instantaneous transportation to the interstellar craft by means of a levitation or teleportation beam. Depending on the degree of the quality of the collective human consciousness, in different worlds throughout the multiverse the quality of human consciousness is different. The electromagnetic, gravitational, radiation, alpha and gamma ray radiation, as well as other properties of the surrounding world, change for all human forms. According to the two basic true human characteristics, which are intellect and altruism, The higher the quality of our thoughts and emotions, the more dynamic, flexible, and universal the properties of our time essence are. Hence, our realization opportunities continuously increase through the emergence of an ever wider range of narrowly specific superpowers among people. Provided for this, not only every moment of our existence is structured by an ever-increasing amount of information in geometrical progression, but also the subjective chronological component of the essence of time, which structures our personal self-consciousness, also radically changes towards acceleration. Therefore, throughout different worlds, the chronological time, one of the greatest illusions of our personal self-consciousness, is reckoned by us in different ways. Some cycles of our cosmic creativity are counted in decades and hundreds of millennia. Others by tens and hundreds of millions of conditional analogs of our conventional years, while yet others by tens and hundreds of billions of years. The time factor, subjectively dividing our individual interpretations, creates the conditions for the formation in our mind of the far-fetched illusion of spatial separation, which will greatly weaken as we acquire some extrasensory abilities later on. However, in reality, from the position of simultaneousness of all occurrences throughout the multiverse, the entire diversity of various types of collective consciousness of both ancient and all the future human civilizations is not divided in any way. The fact that you were born at some particular time and date is just one of the zillion simultaneous parallel effects of the implementation of your multisensory choices throughout the infinite amount of various worlds. Due to different genetic, epigenetic, and other circumstances, in some of the worlds you were able to make better decisions and cultivated in your mind more human mental states and perceptions, while in some other worlds you were inclined to make more instinctive, low-frequency choices, which are too inferior for the human type of consciousness. Thus, the zillions of you have transformed and become part of the biological forms of self-consciousness, personal interpretations, to varying degrees of more primitive types of collective human consciousness, while your other zillions have become part of forms of self-consciousness, personal interpretations, which structure more or less developed biological and bioplasma civilizations. Some of your more advanced forms of self-consciousness have more effectively implemented their modifications in the direction of developing of highly sensuous intelligence and highly intelligent altruism, and begun exploring new cosmic expanses, somehow compellingly adapting to the objects of their research, while gaining certain features and losing others. Pleiades, allegory or not? The fact that we view the constellation of the Pleiades as our stellar home, where our more advanced interpretations were born, is a generalized allegorical image of our multi-dimensional cosmic cradle, where many of our interpretations exist in their subjective now. Although I admit that often in the lyrics of our IFAR songs, under the concept of stellar home, I also imply a specific reality of truly existing hereditary relationships between us and the native Pleiadians. They are carried out through the expression of individual parts of our and their genomes, which is powerfully amplified and stabilized by the increased activity of the highly vibrational zones of our cerebral cortex, for example dorsolateral and ventrolateral parts, similar to those that at the distance and intuitively unite the mother with her child. The DNA molecules of certain civilizations that participated in the creation of our earthly human forms of self-consciousness contain their own hereditary psychic relationships, which in their civilization are reflected to varying degrees, their culture, society, tastes, and priorities. Through the expression of the corresponding parts of our genome, these distance connections naturally excite in our extrasensory perception spontaneous pictures of extraterrestrial realities, peculiarities of life, as well as unusual desires, feelings, and emotional states. This is especially true of the altered meditative state of consciousness when the control of the creators of the dorsomedial and orbitofrontal areas of the prefrontal cortex as their functions are rigidly tied to our survival on this planet, are significantly weakened. That is when the real and not imaginary communication session begins, which, because of the still insufficiently powerful high vibration energy of the brain, its higher potential could seriously damage one's health, most often than not is one-sided. Thus, freed from the powerful tension of endless psychic experiences, genomic memory provides out to the epiphysis bioscreen some very bright and informative pictures of Pleiadean lifestyle. Creative elements, relationship episodes, partial telepathemes, and more. For more information regarding this subject, you can read my earlier books describing my spontaneous contacts with the crews of the two stellar crafts. From the wave-functioning standpoint, our and their brains are not self-contained, closed circuits, local systems. Cascades of spikes and synapse fireworks continuously formed in our brain can qualitatively to some extent coincide with a part of the same spikes and synapse signals of other people, regardless of their position in the multiverse, thus providing opportunities for mutual interaction. The brain is a universal receiving-transmitting device, constantly operating on various wave and p-wave ranges. In addition, the structural features of our DNA systems are designed for certain movements throughout the space-time.